the opportunity to watch it this morning. And now that you've seen it, you're going to have this amazing experience of being able to talk to the director, to talk to one of the stars of the film, to talk to legal experts, legislative experts, food system experts, who can, we can just have this amazing conversation about the film now. So I'm really excited about that. So I'm Alexis Badenmare. I'm the political director of Organic Consumers Association. We're working for the right to healthy food for everyone. That's a Green New Deal principle that we're very much aligned with. And we want to take down and transform the meat industry as we currently know it and create a regenerative organic food system. So that's where I'm coming from. And I know that you all share my goals, but I'm interested in hearing from each of you. Should we do introductions as we do our first question? Is that okay? Okay. All right. So since we have the director with us, Matt, introduce yourself and then tell me how you got started on this project that became Right to Harm.
Yeah, so I'm Matt Wechsler. I'm based in Evanston, Illinois, just above Chicago. And I got started with this when I just had some revelations in my life, starting probably around 2005, 2008, sometime, and then I was actually a former climate change denier, and I started seeing things a little bit differently. I met my wife, Annie, who's the co-director on Right to Harm, and she took me to my first farmer's market. And I thought the whole farmer's market experience didn't make sense to me up until then. But when I had the opportunity to taste all the amazing flavors that were at that farmer's market, I was smitten with the idea of where they were coming from and how they were being raised and what these farmers were doing. And it put me on a path to really want to explore the sustainability of the food system, and that was the topic of our first film that came out in 2016. And along the way of making that film, we met John Eichert, who starts and ends Right to Harm. And during the interview of John, he started talking about this other side of agriculture that I often call the dark side of agriculture, and it was about how the pollution is affecting the rural community members around where these factory farms are located. And our jaws just dropped while we were interviewing him, and we recognized that it was almost a topic in itself that really spoke to how the food system is not just an environmental issue or an animal rights issue, but it's a human rights issue, and it's at the basis of equality in America too. And so, to me, my two films has really been about wanting to try to create transparency and equality in the food system. And I think, at some point in time, that could be something that we shoot for as a country. So that's me and a little bit about how Right to Harm was made.
Great. Well, while we're doing this first round of introductions, we'll go next to Iris. When I was talking about food system experts, you are who I was thinking about. So tell us about what you do.
Hi, everyone. My name is Iris Van Gillingham, and I am a second year at College of the Atlantic. And I grew up on a small farm in the Catskill Mountains. My family has Wildroots Farm, which is a diversified organic farm. And for the first 10 years of my life, we ran a 150-person CSA, a community-supported agriculture operation. And I got involved in the intersectionality of agriculture and climate because when I was 7 years old, landmen started to come into our community wanting to lease land for fracking. And I grew up in the midst of the fracking fight in New York on an organic farm with a dad who was both a farmer and an activist. And it kind of steered me down this path of learning a lot about how interconnected our agriculture and mitigation of climate change and social justice issues, farm workers' rights and farmers' rights. And that has led me to be really interested in looking at how we can transform our food system and transform our society in general, because these systems that are in place are not healthy for our environment, for the people. And this has led me to work with Catskill Mountain Keeper this summer, which is a nonprofit organization based in the Catskills that does both work in New York State and on a national level around fossil fuels and creating a just transition. And what a just transition looks like when you have all of the most impacted people at the table, and what you can create when everyone's voices are heard and part of the discussion.
Awesome. We'll go to Maria next. I have to admit, Maria and Matt, that when I learned about the factory farm system, the people who live near factory farms were not the first people that I thought of in terms of who was being impacted. So I think that that's clearly the most powerful message of your film. So Maria, let us know, we know a lot about you because you're in the film, but what we don't know a lot about, I think it's evident in the film, but there's an organization behind the activists like you who are profiled in the film, SRAP. So Maria, tell us about yourself and tell us about the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project.
Thank you. My name is Maria Payen, and I am a regional consultant now for Socially Responsible Agricultural Project. I actually, as you can probably figure out, got into this line of work now because of the injustices that not only my family had gone through and other community members, but we were receiving calls from communities beyond ours when they were seeing newspaper articles about what was going on in Peach Bottom Township in this little rural area in Pennsylvania for help. And what you find out as a community member is that basically you're pretty much on your own. You are thrown into a situation where you are trying to learn about permitting. What's an NPDES permit? What's a CAPO permit? What's a stormwater permit? What's the local zoning regulations? And here you are, and you're a housewife, you're a business owner. You have no kind of experience with this. So the easiest way for me to describe SRAP is boots on the ground in the local community. That is the connection to where you all of a sudden get ramped up on, a 3-month course in technology, in health impact, in water impacts, and it is a full circle on how to literally fight locally on the ground. Because at this point in a community, we need to work on federal regulations, we need state regulations, but in your community, you are at 90 seconds till midnight, and you need help then. And that is the best way to explain who SRAP is and what we do. Now, we also advocate for a farming system that is just, that is equitable to communities, that is economically viable for small farms. And this all is interwoven. So that's the best way to describe how I got to be a member of the SRAP team and how this drives me every day of my life until the system's changed.
Thank you, Maria. Well, among other organizations that I admire quite a bit for the work that they do fighting factory farms is Food and Water Watch. And Tara, you're joining us today to represent Food and Water Watch and the excellent work that you do. I know a lot about Food and Water Watch, but I don't know as much about you. This is our first time meeting, but give us an introduction to yourself and your organization.
Sure, thanks so much for having me and putting me after Maria, even though that's a tough act to follow. I'm Tara Heinzen. I'm an attorney with Food and Water Watch. And, personally, the environmental and animal welfare harms of factory farming drew me to this issue at a really young age. And I've been working on factory farm issues initially as a grassroots organizer, and then as a consultant, actually with SRAP for a brief time, and more recently as an attorney for almost the past 18 years. So I've been with Food and Water Watch for about 5 years, but really it's many of the folks who are on the SRAP team who drew me into this community and this issue and have made me a lifer. A little bit about Food and Water Watch for those not familiar. We're a national membership organization. We were founded in 2005. And our theory of change is really about organizing to build power and reclaim our democracy. And we think we do that by holding our elected officials accountable. And our priority issues are food, water, and climate change. Banning factory farms is one of our priority campaigns. And we work with a lot of individuals and community groups featured in Right to Harm, including Maria, on a regular basis. We have moratorium campaigns at the state level underway with partners in Iowa, Oregon, and Maryland. And we also are prioritizing some federal legislation, including the Farm System Reform Act and the Merger Moratorium Bill.
Thanks, Tara. And now Jay, so you're part of the Richman Law Group team with Kim and Sage and Jack, who are also with us today. And you gave an excellent presentation during the Food System Summit on the work that the Richman Law Group does. So if you could encapsulate that for us, I think everybody would be interested to hear.
Sure, thanks so much. And so while I am a lawyer, unlike most of the folks here, I'm not an environmental law or policy expert. In fact, most of the folks who probably live in these affected communities know more about NIPD's permits and some of these other environmental regulations than I do. What we focus on at Richman Law Group is false advertising. And specifically, we come at this issue from the perspective, understanding that the actual substantive laws that exist, whether that's environmental laws or animal cruelty laws that actually govern the actions that farms can and can't take, are really bad and really inadequate. And there's tons of extremely harmful, even deadly and torturous actions that farms can take that may be technically within the bounds of environmental laws or animal welfare laws, et cetera. And so what we do is, given that really unfavorable regulatory and legal environment, is we use false advertising laws to hold these companies accountable when they lie to consumers about actually being sustainable, about being humane, or other similar ethical claims that these farms make. And that allows us to really hold farms and the ag industry accountable, even when they're maybe technically in compliance with the law, or when it may be otherwise impossible to hold them accountable through these conventional legal strategies.
Well, we already have a great question from one of our audience members, Joyce. She has a question for Matt, the director of the film. And she says, why didn't certain names of companies come up? In the film, you don't hear a lot about Tyson or JBS or Purdue or Smithfield, although we do know the names Hickman and Murphy Brown, because those companies are part of campaigns that are covered in the film. So so what are your thoughts on that, Matt?
Yeah, I always saw that including names like that and kind of creating the villains like that is oftentimes just a way of just blaming it on one company or another company, when I like to think that we're all responsible for this at some level. So I have too many friends who are like, oh, it's all Monsanto's fault. If only Monsanto would change. And I really hated hearing that. I really hated hearing that. And I just like the idea of putting the information out there and allowing viewers to really decide for themselves how they want to commit to any sort of change, if they want to do that. And there's great organizations like who you all are working with, who are helping to take down some of these big giants. And I think they're going to fall on their own. Personally, I think most of them are falling over on their own sword at the moment. So I think it's about rebuilding a better food system, and that's really about identifying individually what we all need to do to be a part of that.
That's really interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that. So it was by design, and you didn't want us to focus so much on our perceived enemies. Apparently you wanted us to find solutions. And my favorite part of the film as an organic and regenerative farming activist is Lynn and the images of his farm and how beautiful it is. But Iris is doing similar work supporting that type of alternative to the industrial food system. So Iris, why don't you expand upon that a bit? How can we foster the opposite of what we see in right to harm?
Yeah, so one of the things that is really important when we think about our food system is that these issues are not new. My great-grandfather was a horse and dairy farmer in Herkimer County, New York. And growing up, my great-uncles saw the issues that were there, but they were also farmers. My dad was discouraged from starting a farm because of these issues that were already taking place in our food system. If you look at the history, the consolidation and the exploitation of the land, it just traces back to this idea that getting bigger is better. And that is what has been told to a lot of farmers. But one saying that I think is really good is that the best fertilizer is a farmer's footprints. And that is the idea that if you have a manageable herd of cows, if you have a couple hundred acres and you're growing vegetables on 10 acres, or you have your animals and you're diversified, you have a relationship with everything that you are touching and that you're processing and then giving to consumers. When you get to a size where you're milking 24/7 and 1,000 cows, there's not that same relationship and connection that is vital to healthy and good quality food. And this is one of the biggest issues with some of our rural communities too. When you have a farm and you have many farms, they are smaller, they're employing people. When you get these commercial industrialized farms with inhumane working conditions, the people who will work there are migrants, and then there's a bunch of racism issues that come into play with that as well. So one of the biggest things that I see as something we need to be talking about is how do we look at recreating smaller economies and regional farming and food supply systems. We've seen that with COVID, that the supply chain totally failed when the pandemic hit. Store shelves were totally empty. And where did people go? People called their local farmer. And the issue was that local farmers who were being dropped by restaurants suddenly were getting all of these calls, and they couldn't fill all of the orders that people were wanting of food because we've lost so many of our small farmers over the course of time. In the 1900s, 40% of the US population lived on a farm and 60% lived in rural areas. Today, there is only 1% of the population that lives on farms. And so we're seeing that these ideas of consolidation and industrial agriculture, which means we're using more fossil fuels, more chemicals, the quality is going down, and people are experiencing that in times of issues and crisis, like a pandemic, there's a shortage of access to proper healthy food for our communities. So this is an opportunity to realize we need to change this. And small farms, each place and location, community is going to have different needs. It's going to mean that, you can't get strawberries in January everywhere, but it means that people will have to learn a little bit more about where their food is coming from, get to know their farmer, develop local jobs and opportunities for young people in rural communities. And that's something that has not been prioritized in the history of agriculture. And that's not something that a lot of the government groups and Farm Bureau and people who are supposed to be looking out for young farmers and small farmers, they are in the pockets of industry and they are dealing with, these policies that then are crushing small farms across the country.
Well, another thing that I really like about the film is it's a playbook for activism. It really teaches us how to follow what Maria did and organize our communities to fight factory farms. So Maria, I want to go back to you, and you have a lot of expertise through your own work and through the network of the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project. You all have tried everything under the sun to protect local communities from the harms of factory farms, but you found some things are real winners. And there was a strategy that you told me about recently in terms of local ordinances. So if you could tell us all about that.
Sure. So the one thing, that we found at local level in trying to get some type of local control, what many folks probably don't realize is that there are agricultural states have something called right to farm laws. The right to farm laws originally were designed to protect the small farmers, right, from people moving in and following a tractor slow on the highway. And these have all been corrupted now to basically protect this system of industrialized agriculture, not the small farmer. States have become very aggressive in trying to put setbacks to where local control cannot do things more stringent than state law. One thing, and this is really relevant and important right now, the American Public Health Association, as a matter of fact, just in November, put out a new position statement. This is the American Public Health Association, not a green group, which calls for a moratorium on CAFOs because of not being able to manage the waste and the health impacts on these communities. Now, this is nothing new to anyone in communities in rural areas where this is happening because we live it every single day. So one of the things which we did was looked at what does state law not address and where is it that we can come up with something that is going to be more protective of the health of communities. So we came up with a health ordinance. What a health ordinance does is really not asking a tremendous amount from someone who wants to put an operation in. So we require UV lighting to kill pathogens, emissions from the fans. Biofilters are something that every single industry in this country has been using for 50 to 60 years. This is not, some type of very technical problem. It is relatively inexpensive and easy to do, to put biofilters on. This will protect the community more. To site facilities, as we see with various disease outbreaks. Everybody remembers swine flu in 2008. Avian flu, we have cases. Arkansas had it a couple of years ago, pretty bad. And we have it throughout. A lot of people don't know this, but you can look this up online and see it's around. So we put in setback distances from one facility to another facility, which the state does not address. And this is for the spread of contagious infectious disease. As we know, this can be spread airborne. So this is something that's basically saying, if you want to be a good neighbor, you want to come in and operate, these are things that you can do to make yourself be a good neighbor and the community be safer. There's also things like ammonia scrubbers that can be added. So you need to use the toolbox.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. It's an amazing discovery that you all made, that there were places where you could wiggle in and regulate the corporations that the states hadn't already prevented local communities from being able to do. So if anyone's interested in getting a copy of your model resolution, I'm sure you can contact Maria and contact SRAP for that. It's a really good strategy that we should promote widely. I want to go now to other legislative strategies, but to Tara, and have you tell us what you all are doing at the federal level. I know you do work very closely with SRAP at the local and state level, but let's touch on some federal policy for a moment.
Sure. So I mentioned that there are two major federal bills that we're supporting right now. Both were introduced, among others, by Senator Cory Booker. One is the Farm System Reform Act, which is a wonderful roadmap for a transition to a more resilient, sustainable food system. The Farm System Reform Act would ban new and expanding large factory farms, and it would require a phase out of existing large CAFOs by 2040. And importantly, it would also provide $10 billion over the next 10 years to help farmers have a just transition from the really extractive, exploitative contract model that many growers are currently trapped in, into more sustainable and probably more profitable forms of farming that are better for their communities, for consumers, and for workers. So this is really an incredible roadmap for the food system that we need. And another bill that we see as kind of a companion bill to that is the Food and Agribusiness Merger Moratorium and Antitrust Review Act, which is a bit of a mouthful, but we call it the Merger Moratorium Bill. And that would also get a consolidation in the food system by enacting a moratorium on food and ag mergers, which is extremely important because our antitrust laws are absolutely not up to the task and have not prevented the mergers and consolidation that has been squeezing farmers, hurting consumers at the grocery store, and really hurting workers and everyone at every chain in the food system. So those two bills are extremely important. They're more important now than ever, as we see that the pandemic has really showed the cracks and the vulnerabilities in the industrial model, and that it really is not resilient at all. And so this is an important crisis and opportunity where we need to move forward on consolidation-related legislation at the federal level, because these structural barriers are not going to be solved purely by consumer choices. There aren't, as Iris explained, enough family farms to serve the needs of consumers, and certainly the needs of workers and farmers. So we need this federal policy to move forward, and we're supporting those two bills.
That's great. So Food and Water Watch, I know you all have action alerts on your website for both of those bills. So if anyone's interested in learning more about the bills and contacting your member of Congress and your two senators about them, it's very important and very exciting too. I know that the moratorium idea is one that's been around for a long time. North Carolina has a moratorium on new factory farms or factory farm expansion. And in North Carolina, there was even a program similar to the Farm System Reform Act that allowed farmers to get bought out. They could get paid to stop factory farming if they were in a flood zone. And some of that money came from the federal government through the Environmental Protection Agency, but it was state administered. And so these are exciting state strategies that groups like Food and Water Watch and SRAP have worked on for a very long time. And it's really neat to see this come to the level of national legislation, and we can advocate for it all over the country. So thank you all for your work on that. I'll move to Jay now, because you gave us a really cool overview of the interesting legal work that Richman Law Group does. You all have filed some lawsuits on behalf of Organic Consumers Association and others that I'm really proud of being involved in. And so let's have you talk about those. You could talk about the Smithfield case, for instance.
Sure. So the general, gist I was starting to say before of our cases is that you have this growing trend where even the largest companies in the world now, whether it's Tyson or Smithfield or JBS and all of the lovely folks that Joyce mentioned in her question, everybody, no matter how big, no matter how evil, no matter how destructive to animals and the environment, is claiming that they are humane, they're claiming they're sustainable, they're claiming that they're safe, all sorts of claims about their products and production practices. They're claiming they're good for workers. And we, think that's unacceptable, and think that there's a massive gulf between the claims that these companies are making and what they're leading consumers to believe and the actual reality of their production practices. So we work with a variety of groups, including, and I'm glad Joyce is here from ALDF, pioneers in the space like ALDF, and have worked closely with other groups who have used these false advertising statutes at the state level to hold companies to their promises and basically say, okay, you've claimed you're sustainable. Let's see what a court and a jury has to say about that. And then we get to literally put them under a microscope with whether that's testing their products to find various chemical contaminants that they use, and then do a basic undercover investigation on steroids by putting their board members under subjecting them to depositions, getting these companies' documents, and really telling the real story about the actual true nature of these companies. And as I said before, it's an extremely powerful tool that we can use, given the general backdrop where you have these right to farm laws and you have all these other impediments that make it other legal strategies extremely challenging. And so here is an extremely promising and emerging area where we think there actually is space to hold companies accountable, even where state governments or the federal government is not acting. So yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up.
Great. Well, I'm going to go back to Matt. We have another question from Joyce, and I have my own opinions on it. So I'm going to preempt you just for a moment to say that you chose to focus on the communities that, like Maria's, individuals, families, communities that are impacted by industrial farming, by CAFOs, because they live near these CAFOs. And as I mentioned before, this was something I had embarrassingly not thought much about, because it was definitely out of sight, out of mind. And I know that animal rights organizations go to extraordinary lengths to document what happens inside CAFOs. And there's, we have all of the ag-gag laws and so much that prevents people from understanding how animals are actually raised versus how the corporations tell us they're raised. So I know that's a really important project to expose that. But Matt, you chose to focus on communities like Maria's and the activists like Maria, who are managing against all odds in this David and Goliath fight to go up, often as poor communities, people of color who don't have access to the legal system and who are having to challenge some of the largest corporations and most powerful corporations on earth. So why did you choose to tell us that story?
Yeah, well, when we looked at the plethora of films that were already out there on food and especially on factory farming, there was a number of them that already spoke to the animal rights issues. So we felt like that argument and that part of it had really already been out there in the media. We were trying to come at it from an angle that the industry really wasn't going to see coming. And what we wanted to really do was we wanted to connect those who are environmentalists, and we wanted them to see that the environmental issues that they are concerned about are also health issues. And for people like Maria, who live around factory farms, it's a major public health issue for those community members. We felt that if we were able to transition the talking points of the environmental movement and the animal rights movement to talk more about human health, human welfare, human rights, we felt like, honestly, that there's a better chance to legislate behind that. There's a better chance to create equality behind that. And so that was the angle we wanted to put out there, feeling that all the other angles had been covered, wanting to really show a different side of it, that is this environmental injustice. We really haven't seen environmental injustice in the food system outside of, a couple films that talk about labor issues. So that was the thinking behind all that.
That's interesting, Matt. I didn't think of it as a strategic choice. I thought of it as, just because people don't know. But your position is actually that it's strategic to work with people like Maria, who actually have a chance of stopping a factory farm from coming into their neighborhood, which means stopping that factory farm from existing. And if we were all networked within this community of people working from the grassroots up, we would have a fighting chance to limit the spread of this form of agriculture.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we, in our 2016 film Sustainable, we talk about animal welfare issues and environmental issues. So we had just come off a film where we were covering that. I'm all about solutions in the films that I make. I know that oftentimes that puts myself out there as as being more vulnerable for presenting some of those solutions. But in sustainable, we presented a lot of agricultural solutions, and in Right to Harm, we wanted to show communities that are the solutions themselves, the Davids fighting Goliath. So, and people like Maria, they're heroes to me and my wife, and I think they should be heroes to all of us for the work that they're doing behind the scenes that nobody's really thinking about. So,
Hear, hear. So Iris, you're doing a lot of good community organizing as well. Can you tell us what Catskill Mountain Keeper is up to on this subject?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, I grew up in the middle of the fracking fight on the New York border to Pennsylvania, where there is a lot of fracking happening, and New York State is putting a lot of infrastructure through. And one of the privileges that I've had is to travel around the country and work and meet with incredible activists from frontline communities. And it's one of these interesting things where you take all of the water contamination and the air and all of that, and you just, instead of having a factory farm, replace it with an oil refinery or a well pad. And it's the same issues that are coming up, the same fights that community members are dealing with, where they're up against these massive corporations, and there are a couple of community organizers, oftentimes in already impacted communities that are low income, communities of color, indigenous communities, especially with fossil fuel extraction, a lot of it is happening on reservations. And so what Catskill Mountain Keeper and some of the work that I have been doing is working to bring together some of the grassroots white environmentalist groups that have resources and are doing all of this work, and bringing them into a room and space with these community members that are dealing with the firsthand effects of their drinking water being contaminated and literally not being able to drink out of their own faucet. And getting all of the right people in the room so that then you can build the solutions, because oftentimes we end up in these silos of having these separate conversations, but we need to share the resources. We need to bring those conversations together and share our experiences to move forward, to vision what kind of a food system, what kind of a just transition, what kind of a society we want to be a part of. So that's what Catskill Mountain Keeper has done. We've done work with a lot of coalitions and coalition building, and we've also helped to organize and put together over the last 10 years, 9 different extreme energy extraction summits across the country, and each one is invited to a community by that community that is feeling the impact. So, we've been to Houston, Texas, where there's 50 miles of nonstop petrochemical plants and oil refineries in these communities of color, and we've been to the Bakken oil field, and it's one of those things where these community stories are so often forgotten. And I really admire that Matt chose to feature the people's stories, because the same thing often happens with climate change, where everyone cares about a polar bear sitting on ice and that's melting, but they forget that there is literally Black families right in New York City that have severe cases of asthma because they're living in an impacted community. And so these issues are so intersectional, and you cannot separate the communities from the industrialization that's happening from the impacts. They're so interconnected, and I think this area of looking at how do we uplift and support frontline communities as well as addressing the issue. Because if you have empowered frontline community members, they have the energy and they have the direct reason to be taking action, that their amount of dedication is going to change the course of history for whatever these issues are that we're talking about. And that's why it is so, so incredibly important that the people that are in the room are not just the elected officials and leaders talking about policies and bills. So one of the things that Catskill Mountain Keeper has been working on recently is the Community Leadership and Protection Act, which is one of the strongest policies in the country around climate. And it's created by a coalition of over 200 organizations around the state of New York. And it was passed, and right now they're working on an act around investment of how do we actually create a just transition that is equitable, because everyone can talk about a just transition, but we need to remember the farm workers, the food workers, the frontline communities, and the industry workers, the people who are a part of these systems that have been put in place, and how do we transition all of us towards the kind of future that we want to have, where people are not getting sick from their own drinking water. So that is some of the work that Catskill Mountain Keeper has been doing with frontline communities and climate justice and food systems. Is like, we need to get the people in the room who have an investment in creating these solutions, because that's really where the power is.
That's great. That's a good lead in for a question I've been wanting to ask Maria about community control, because this varies widely across the country. In some places, you have the right to decide what happens in your community, and in some states, you don't. So there was a question from the audience from Crystal, and she wanted to ask Matt initially about what's going on in Illinois and the Midwest. But I'm going to pass this question to Maria, and perhaps you could answer the question about community control, how it differs in various regions of our country, and why we get concentrations of CAFOs in certain states and regions.
So that is an interesting question. And firstly, I want to say I'm so glad that we just followed behind Iris, because I want to add this in. I don't want people to miss this. I was also in Pennsylvania working with the fracking communities as well, because of the farming issues. We really need to listen to this, because if your issue is you're worried about where your tax money is going, this is an issue for you. If you're worried about animal rights, about humane treatment of animals, this is your issue. If you're worried about social justice and workers, how they are being treated, communities, fence line communities, and environmental injustice, this is your issue. If you are a consumer and you care that your purchases are not hurting other people, this is your issue. So we all need to understand it's not segments, we're not silos, we are a team. And this is how we change things. It's not gonna happen from outside. It's not gonna happen in Washington. It is going to be all of us coming together and pushing. So I encourage people, do not feel helpless. Do not feel like you don't have a voice in this fight. You most certainly do. If you want to go into a store and buy something that is advertised and is truly what's on the label, this is your issue. So now I just wanted to say that, because I think it's really important. But I will get on to the, you're absolutely right, Crystal, the question, and control varies depending on where you are in the country. A lot of it varies by how am I going to say this? The interests of these industries to states, because they stand behind that they provide jobs and they provide a tax base. And, you know, some of these things may be good for states, but I'll tell you what, the local communities that are brunting the burden of this, these are not benefiting the local communities. Perfect example, and Tara knows this, if you go into Somerset County in Maryland, it is #1 in broiler production, yet it is the poorest community in Maryland, right? So this isn't about somebody benefiting from this. As far as local control, it is the voice of the people. It has always been that is going to change your situation. Every single community says, what can I do? Where is the silver bullet? You know, they're looking constantly. There has to be something I'm not finding. It is not, because we know if science mattered, we wouldn't even be having a discussion right now. Your strength is organizing your community and the voice of your community standing strong and saying, this is our community. We want this community to have good jobs, to be somewhere where local businesses thrive, and to be somewhere where you're going to encourage good businesses to come in. One of the main topics we have now is farmers' kids. Guess what? They're all leaving the state, right? Because nothing is coming in. Nothing is changing, because who wants to go into an area where industrial agriculture is the only job out there? So it's something to think about, but a lot of it, you have to look within your local municipalities, whether you have county zoning, township zoning, and you need to find those resources. And Crystal, I think you're connected with SRAP. So that is a challenge for the community, but keep going strong. It is all about organization and getting your voice out there. They have a powerful voice, make yours more powerful. You're standing on the truth that they aren't.
And we're with you. So a question for Tara. We've talked about the ideal scenarios, the really good ways to write an ordinance to slip in between state and local powers and protect communities. We've talked about the federal proposals and state laws that you've worked on. So these are great ideas. Why haven't we been able to win yet? What are the challenges? But also tell us what some successes have been, because I know that Food and Water Watch has had, for instance, incredible successes on passing fracking moratoriums at the state level. And so it seems like we could probably do this around CAFOs as well. So, so your rundown of current challenges and your favorite successes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big challenge is just that this is an incredibly politically powerful industry. It has done a really good job of greenwashing. Big Ag purports to speak for all farmers. And unfortunately, this is an issue where there's bipartisan support for industrial agribusiness. So that's a huge political challenge. And we think, though, that it's politically possible to enact these moratoria to ultimately ban factory farms. And it really does come down to beginning at the grassroots and building that local power. Because even in a state like Iowa, where there isn't as much room to think creatively and come up with the ordinances like Maria has in Pennsylvania, you still have the ability to, for example, organize your county boards of supervisors to support increases in local control or to support a statewide moratorium. And that's some of the organizing work that we're doing with local partners in Iowa right now. So we don't have the local control there, but we do have the local organizing, building that drumbeat of support and building power. And so, one early success we've had there is we've increased our sponsors on our moratorium bill year after year. And last year we got our first Republican co-sponsor for our statewide factory farm moratorium. And this is Iowa. It's got a Republican majority trifecta in all aspects of government. This is a really difficult political issue for people in the state. And we're showing that we are building power, and it is coming from the very local organizing that we're doing. So I think it's really just a matter of building on those incremental wins until it becomes a shift in the power dynamic at the state level. And we absolutely believe that that's possible. So our local organizer focusing on these county level resolutions, there are 99 counties in Iowa. We've got about a quarter of them now have spoken out through resolutions or letters saying we want more local control. And many of them have also said we want the legislature to enact a moratorium. So I think that shows that it is possible to change the power dynamics, even where the industry is most entrenched, especially at a time like this, where the failures of this industry are becoming so apparent, where workers are getting sick, where consumers are suffering. And I think this is just one more kind of chink in the industry's armor that we need to build on.
All right, well, we have, Crystal has written in and she has a problem and it's up to us to think about ways to solve it. So I'll read her note here. She says, we are a certified organic farm, a 750 acre farm. IDOA and IEPA, these are Iowa state organizations, allowed a 5,000 head CAFO to be situated 2,280 feet from our home and from our farm. We have been fighting this CAFO since May of 2018. And the comment is gone, I'm not sure. But anyway, that's enough information. Perhaps I'm sorry if you didn't mean for me to share that publicly. So we'll do a lightning round on this one because we're almost out of time. But how can we support organic farmers and other community members who are dealing with having this type of agriculture ruin their lives? Let's start with Jay.
So I will clarify. It looks like Crystal said that it's Illinois, not Iowa. That's relevant to the other folks that know more about this than me.
Oops, sorry about that.
But I think I have to defer to everybody else on the panel that this is really their area of expertise, helping folks on the ground. But I can just say that, as part of a broader coalition, I want to continue, beating the drum against these companies and raising, at least, showing the stories of folks like Crystal when these companies try to claim that they are sustainable and that they care for their communities. We can use these cases as examples of how terrible these companies really are. But that's not going to help Crystal in the short term. So I'll hand it off to other folks who can.
Matt, you want to weigh in, given what you've learned creating this film?
Well, I know that Maria might have more answers than me, but certainly in fighting the CAFO, I would reach out to Diane Rosenberg, who is part of JFAN, which is a local organization in Fairfield, Iowa. And then Danny Diamond has done extensive work in SRAP in Illinois. She's from Illinois eventually, so she would know the Illinois law certainly better than anyone else. And she's with SRAP too. But I would say to Crystal, if you're looking for an end market for your organic produce, if that's what you do, my email address is matt@hourglassfilms.com. I might be able to help you out, as I'm kind of entrenched in that part of the local food business. So feel free to reach out to me.
Matt, go ahead and just tell us a little bit more about what you're working on. This is a COVID era enterprise.
It's a COVID enterprise. In the sustainable film, the main character, his name's Marty Travis. He started farming he's a 7th generation farmer who took over his land in 2005 and decided he wanted to grow crops that people could eat and not grow soy and corn that all his neighbors were growing. And it led him to be one of the pioneers of the local food movement in Chicago. And in 2016, Chicago was actually named the best food city by Bon Appetit magazine, a large part because of farmers like Marty and others who had really contributed to the local food scene. And Marty was distributing for 25 farms at the point in time when I filmed him. He's now distributing for over 60 farms, and they were distributing to all restaurants. When COVID happened, he quickly transitioned to supporting individuals, and now I'm working with him to start an online grocery store so that individuals around Chicago can have access to his food. So we are looking to grow. We're looking to take over the Midwest with our local food, all grown on regenerative farms, pesticide-free, GMO-free. We have incredibly high standards. All of our animal proteins are pasture raised, so our milk's all coming from Jersey cows. We're looking to have the highest ethical standards for a food supply chain that anyone has in the Midwest. So Crystal, please reach out, and hopefully something can happen because of that. So
I think it's a good strategy to think about marketing to consumers that you're a farm that's doing the right thing in the midst of a really hellish situation. And it might be a way to get consumers in urban areas to activate their lawmakers because they don't have the money coming in from the CAFO businesses as much. And it might be a good strategy. Maria, you are the expert. So tell us, when you get a call like this from someone like Crystal, what does SRAP do next? And how can all of us support what SRAP does to help folks like Crystal?
So when we get a call like this, normally we get in touch with Crystal to find out exactly where they're located, what kind of operation that it is coming in, or it could be something that is already there that is not abiding by regulations. We help them navigate through the various permitting stages, help them with technical comments. Unfortunately, and I am a victim of this myself, as you've seen in the movie, you cannot stop every single operation. And that's the reality of it. And the reality is not because, it's because of this system that our government has propped up and the regulations in it. It would be great if every one of us could say, you know what, we don't want these in our community, and we are passing something locally saying, nope, we're not gonna have any here. But that is not the reality because of the power of this industry, the lobbying, and the laws. One example we were talking about with Pennsylvania, with the right to farm law. This health ordinance that we passed, I've worked with communities throughout Pennsylvania who have tried to protect themselves and come up with various ordinances, maybe extend a setback. What happens? The way it works in Pennsylvania is that if someone writes an ordinance and it is more stringent than state law, the Attorney General of the state threatens the municipality or the county that we are going to sue you unless you change this unauthorized law. We think it's unauthorized. Now you're dealing in rural areas with very poor townships and counties who, guess what? They don't have the money to take on the state, the power of the state in that kind of fight. So they use it as a bully pulpit to intimidate, to stop these kind of. Now, when we passed this ordinance, it has not been challenged. And I have to say, Food and Water Watch was involved in this. It was Michelle Merkel and Scott Edwards. Matter of fact, Scott gave up his July 4th, to help get this written, because SRAP, like I said, we're not attorneys, right? So in communities, we can sometimes hook up various resources because we're not a legal organization, right? We help to organize. So sometimes you need those connections and people don't have that. So Crystal, I get it. I understand the frustration that you're feeling, and especially with an operation like you're doing things the right way and trying to be environmentally sensitive. All I can tell you is just keep your community organized. The deadlines, keep on them. Letters to the editor, make it public, and get as much. You know what? This has always been my belief. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. The more people that know, the more people that are going to jump in to help, just like Matt right here.
Well, thank you, Maria, and thank you, everyone. Alexis, perhaps you'd like to have the last word here.
Well, I'm just really inspired to keep working on this cause. Thank you, Matt, for bringing it to our attention, and thank you to all the panelists for everything you're doing. We're with you. We're going to keep this fight going.
And I just want to say, if anyone is interested to continue the conversation, Mountain Keeper is hosting a webinar on Monday night called Regional Solutions, Transforming Our Food System in New York State. And we're going to be having some really intense and interesting dialogue. So I hope you all can join.
Great. All right. Peace, everyone. Take care.